Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Black Power Media. I am Tierney Cherie, and I am thankful that Black Power Media is allowing me to host today's program on their platform. So thank you all for letting me host today. I am here for a very important event. I'm here for a very important announcement. First of all, if you don't know, this is the 70th anniversary of We Charge Genocide. And we know We Charge Genocide was a very momentous occasion as far as African people asserting our rights against the colonial powers. And it was a stepping stone that we're going to be using for this conversation today. We're going to be launching an initiative, a program, and we're going to have a conversation with you all today. So before we get started, I want to allow my comrades, my brothers, to introduce themselves. So I see on my screen, I have Comrade Toivo, then we have Comrade Songo, we have Comrade Ikemba. So if you all could introduce yourselves, talk about your organizations that you are here representing today.
All right, let me just quickly get started. All right, so I'm Toivo Esheke. So the org I work with while I'm here in Southern Africa, and I say Southern Africa because I don't respect these colonial borders that were given to us. When I say Southern Africa, I mean the region, right? So when I'm here in the region, I work with Black First, Land First. They are, if you will, a Black consciousness organization that split a few years ago from, if people know, the EFF in South Africa split from that group to kind of push a more radical platform. So when I'm down here, I work mostly with them. And when I'm in the U.S., I work, with groups in the Bronx, New York, mostly. Around issues around anti-racism, anti-colonialism, anti-sexism, and all the isms above. So I'm very happy to be a part of this. Tierney, thank you for bringing us and hustling us together like cattle, but hustling us together in the right direction. Good shepherd, as it were. And I'm really happy to be here. I'm really honored to be here at this platform with you all.
Thank you. And Comrade Songo, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Comrade Shongo Omojola of the Movement for African Emancipation in Nigeria. We're a young organization and aspire to, to build across Africa, but primarily in Nigeria. We try to raise consciousness. We think it's very important to raise consciousness to understand the real roots of our crisis in Africa and in Nigeria. With the real roots being neo-colonialism, how it keeps our countries poor and oppressed, and how it ensures that we have bad leaders, puppets of the neo-colonialist rulers, basically. So we're very engaged in trying to raise consciousness, doing educational work, and also engaged in whatever mass actions are around in order to bring the people organized to essentially replace their bad rulers and to have independence for us here in Nigeria and in Africa. Thank you.
And then my brother Ikemba, of course, you are a member of WCC, but who are you representing today as part of this collective?
Yeah, I'm representing the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. I'm a member of that organization, as well as WCC, We Charge Colonialism, as you just mentioned. The NPDM, is an international organization working to overthrow colonialism in all of its forms, the institution of colonialism around the world. So wherever African people are colonized, that's where we're looking to organize. So in the continent, in the diaspora, that's where we're working at. I'm based in Philadelphia, also in New York City, where I teach history. I consider myself an activist historian. So I attempt to use history and connect that to our struggles, our revolutionary struggles, and our Black radical tradition. Use that and connect that to our fight today to liberate ourselves. I think that's it.
Thank you all. And there was lot more other organizations that are involved with this new initiative, current initiative we're going to be talking to you all about. These are the brothers who were so gracious to volunteer their time with us today, but we are standing as a collective of Pan-Africanist, African-led organizations. And the whole reason why we're together today is to talk about the issue of colonialism. Colonialism being this overarching global system all of our people are facing. And while the looks of the system might be different from country to country and from region to region, we're still facing the same system. And so that's really the purpose of what this program is going to be about. We're going to have some conversations about what decolonization means in light of the fact that our ancestors charged genocide against the colonial powers 70 years today, and we're going to be charging colonialism today. Now, I do want to say, first of all, I'm going to show our poster that is for a convention that this whole thing will be around. This is Pan-African Unity or Perish, a call for the abolition of neocolonialism. We are planning a virtual conference on July 21st to 23rd, and it's going to be heavily centered on issues of regime change, issues of sanctions, and hosted by the country of Zimbabwe. We just confirmed with Zimbabwe that the president of Zimbabwe, President Emerson Mnangagwa, is going to be the opening speaker. And we are inviting everyone to sign up for that today. We're having pre-registration until July. So as of right now, the tickets are, I believe, $25 if you're inside of a US or European country, and $15 if you're coming from Africa or coming from the Caribbean, the global south essentially. We want to make sure that we recognize that our proximity to empire should not determine who's able to attend or not. So I'm going to drop that link right now, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about why we're here today. So first, I want to recognize a number of organizations that are also a part of this collective. We call this collective Africa Unity Movement for Decolonization. To tell you all our mission statement, it is to advance the liberation and sovereignty of African nations and people through information and knowledge sharing and the coordination of other resources as needed across a united front of African-led organizations. I want to emphasize that all of these organizations, we are not the same, meaning we might have different philosophical differences. We might have different leanings as far as politics. Some of us might be against even dealing with politics, and some of us might try to organize in the community instead. But the thing that unites us all is that we're African-led, and also that we are understanding that our problem as African people is colonialism. So just to list the organizations that are a part of this collective: African Continental Unity Party, the Movement for African Emancipation that Comrade Songo is a part of, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, Black First, Land First, which Comrade Toivo is here representing, Friends of the Congo, Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, Economic Fighters League, Center of Pan-African Thought, We Charge Colonialism, the organization that I started to address the colonial system. We have CASA coming from Haiti. We have African People's Socialist Party, as Brother Ikemba is here representing, Pan-African Congress of Azania, the Black Radical Collective, also, which Comrade Toivo is also representing. We have State 55, Pan-African Community Action, and FTP Movement. And the thing that we all have in common, again, we agree that what we're facing is not just racism. It's not just, discrimination. It's not just corruption. What we're really dealing with is an intentional effort by our oppressors who collectively came together to control us and control us all equally. We're all equally colonized, even though our situations look different. So with that, I just want to open the floor up to our brothers and also just get your input as far as why do you feel like a collective like this is needed today, particularly where you don't see a lot of conversation inside of the mainstream Pan-Africanist circles that want to deal with the colonial capitalist system? Why, and anyone can jump in, why do you feel like it's essential that we unite on these basic principles?
I can jump in. I want the just for clarity too. Representing International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, NPDOM, not the African People's Socialist Party.
My bad.
But they're connected, you know, so I get it. But yeah, but a collective like this is very important, is very necessary, because the colonial powers, they are at their strength when they work together, and they're able to colonize the masses of African people because they work together. They're very organized in their oppression and exploitation of African people, because African people have been divided, because one of the strengths of the colonizer and the way that they're able to stay in power is they divide African people, and their strength is based off of our weakness, and we're weaker when we are divided. But the more that we become organized and unified, we're able to topple the colonizer, because they represent a minority in the world. And so so they play off of our division. As long as they can keep us divided, they can remain strong, because once again, like, they represent a minority in the world. So a collective like this is important because it's important for us to show solidarity among ourselves, despite our different ideologies, our different theories, because we all want the same goal, which is liberation, right? Decolonization. If we are able to unify among ourselves, I think it's symbolic for the masses to be able to see that, because one of the things we hear about, well, at least I hear from the masses, is that, we're not even organized or united in our struggle and our fight for liberation. So I think, that's why it's important to show the people that despite our differences, we can come together. This is something that Malcolm was attempting to do, and he was teaching us before he was assassinated. And we're all over the world too, as African people. And so if we're unified, we can battle colonialism on different fronts with one single objective. So that's that's why I think it's important. But I'll let people, I can go on, but I'll see if anybody else wants to build.
Yeah, just to throw in also, you mentioned Malcolm laid that foundation. Obviously, we're here, commemorating We Charge Genocide, but also before that, W.E.B. Du Bois also, he was involved in We Charge Genocide, but he also laid that foundation inside of an appeal to the world and the issue of internationalizing our struggle and not being focused on our local politics. That's a different way, I think, of dealing with our issues. So does anyone want to jump in now?
Yeah, could I come in? Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. So hopefully I wouldn't overlap, but I think this is very overdue. I think you just mentioned now what our ancestors achieved, and with the We Charge Genocide. I hope you can hear me, because I seem to be freezing.
You're frozen, but we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So Paul Robeson, W.B. Du Bois, a whole host of our ancestors, achieved quite a lot in pushing forward Pan-Africanism, and it was built a very strong movement with Nkrumah in power in Ghana, Sekou in Guinea, and so on, and there was a suppression by the imperialists, who realized that they had to suppress this. And now we come to where we are today, where across Africa things are quite dire. It's like things get worse, and of course also in the diaspora. And it's like we have to go back to what worked. And Malcolm X talked about that, as you said, about internationalism being quite key to the struggle. And I think very importantly, the unity between those people of African descent in Africa and in the diaspora, linking that struggle, that the power of that unity is very important. But this is overdue. We really need to come together, talk about the strategy for how we can, we can educate, we can build movements, and we can actually really achieve what push forward what our ancestors have laid down. So I think this is essential, and it's a wonderful beginning.
You want to come in, Comrade Toiva?
Yeah, no, again, there's not much more I can add. Essentially, but maybe what I would say is, again, Tyranny and I were speaking right before, Comrade Tyranny were speaking right before we jumped on. And a lot of the issue is just we have to change the conversation. We have to change the narrative, right? We don't have a lot of spaces where, white Western media controls much of the narratives on what freedom for Africa should even look like, even in the context here, say in Southern Africa, i.e., say in Azania, we would call it, say, Southern Africa, right? It controls the conversation, right? You have the SABC News and South African Broadcasting Corporation and whatever. And when I listen to the news, it's like, dang, am I in New York City? Like, what's going on right here? You feel me? It's like a lot of it's the idea and what they want to be. It's almost like they want to show the West that we can be just like you. You feel me? Not saying we need to create something different. We can be just like you. Right. And so what we need to start doing is that we actually need to be coming together in order for us to begin to build different conversations, to begin to give people different avenues to access information. Because as we know, a lot of what happens that what the imperialists do is they constrain access to information, and they give you the information that they want to give you on their terms, how they want to, right? And so part of what we have to do is begin to break that, to begin to provide alternative avenues of information. And we actually have a global Pan-African community, and it's a global community that actually is very curious for alternative narratives, right? CNN and these BBCs and all these people, Sky News is whatever, Deutsche Welle, they no longer have the monopoly of information that they used to have, because we have social media, because we have other forms and avenues to communicate. So for me, I think it's important, most definitely, on the unity question, even if it means unity, even if it means we have to disagree. Because I think that, what did Malcolm X say? He says, if we disagree, we keep it to what we disagree, amongst ourselves. We disagree, and then when we come out with a certain kind of a unified profession, unified position, because the West loves to see us disagree in public, and they love to play one against the other for their own benefit, right? And that happens when we don't have the communication with each other, right? And because so many of us are in our own struggles, and sometimes you can get that tunnel vision where it's like, all right, cool, I'm in the DRC, I'm in Nigeria, I'm in the Bronx, I'm in Atlanta, I'm in, Honduras, I'm in Brazil, Brasilia, you know what I mean? We can sometimes get that way, which is understandable, because you got to fight where you at. But the conference is great, so we can come together and communicate with each other and be like, all right, what you been up to? Oh, okay. Here's what you believe. Oh, all right. And we begin to kind of learn. And even if we disagree, fine. But we just can disagree amongst ourselves and have to go through CNN to see a disagreement, or go through the BBC to get a disagreement. You feel me? We got to come at it with each other. And then that's kind of the way we need to start moving in that way. And so I think this is important, particularly to try to have it on the African continent also, too, because this stuff is needed here. Neo-colonialism and imperialism knows the power of Africa, and they've got to keep us divided, or else they lunch money is going to be gone. Because you know what I mean? So they have to keep us divided. It's important. And unfortunately, they're coming at a lot of the younger African generation who is dealing with the old African powers, who, old African, freedom movements, who have not done things the way, we all thought in certain kinds of ways. And they're trying to bring them into a capitalist mindset, bring them to to associate modernization of Africa with a Western kind of model in Africa. And what we need to start doing is say, no, we have to push against that narrative and actually even explain to people what actually is happening. I mean, when I talk to people here about how poor things are in the United States, they look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, yo, have you been to the Bronx? Like, have you been to some spots? Like, things actually not the people are bad, it's they are put in bad conditions. And so this thing that you want, this modernity, is actually a recipe of death, right? And so this is the kind of conversation we need to begin to have with each other. That's why I think it's so important that we come together and create these alternative spaces for thinking, building together, and then, of course, from that space, collectively mobilizing and moving together. Because once we come united, then their game is over and they know it. And then we can just begin to reorganize not just Africa and the African peoples, but we could reorganize the world on our terms versus taking scraps from some white man's table.
Absolutely. And Toivo, you touched on something that I meant to say, is that while we intended to do this in person, because obviously we need to get inside of a physical space together as African people, as organizers, and not just rely on the internet. Unfortunately, this AmeriCon, I always say it wrong, variant, essentially has put us in a place where we're going to have a hybrid conference. So it's going to be hosted by Zimbabwe. As far as actually in Zimbabwe, they're going to be having a live display where they're going to be able to have speakers speakers present through the camera, but we're also going to be having basically a virtual conference. So we're going to have a hybrid, kind of mix them up together and make this work. And hopefully in the future we could come together. So, and I also want to say that, as we said, we're charging colonialism against these colonial powers. So at the end of this broadcast, I will be releasing a link to our formal document. It is a long document. Do not think you're going to read it all very quickly. But it is a dissection of colonialism, from the history of colonialism, to the present reality of colonialism. It goes into detail about what us as Africans are facing, as far as us, the organizations who have joined so far, what we're facing and what we've observed when it comes to colonialism. And it makes demands and specifically lists a number of countries who are guilty of colonialism, a number of institutions, and a number of corporations. So that will be released at the end of this broadcast. So I did want you to look out for that, and please do share it as well. But I want to get into the juice of this conversation, because we talk about this in the document. I don't want to necessarily re-talk about the substance of the document, because again, we're all going to read it, hopefully. But I want to talk about, is Africa ready to address neo-colonialism? And when I say Africa, I'm making this, Africa, us African people globally, because this pertains to us wherever we are. Are we ready at this particular time to deal with neo-colonialism the same way that we had dealt with formal colonialism during the 50s and the 60s? Anyone jump in?
Yeah, my answer to that would be yes. The only thing is that I will hope we would deal with it differently than we did with colonialism. I believe we wasn't really prepared after independence, speaking on the continent, prepared for the indirect warfare by the colonists on the continent. And so there was quite a bit of undermining of the governments, the independent governments of Africa. And even during that time, I think the idea of Pan-Africanism wasn't adopted by enough African leaders to really bring forth the type of revolution that was needed in Africa. And so I think like today, though there are different ideologies among, because we talk about Pan-Africanism, that's sort of like, this idea, this umbrella that many organizations fall under and have different paths as far as bringing about the liberation of African people. You have some people who consider themselves Pan-Africanists, and they're not even looking for a revolution. So but I think today, like, the idea of Pan-Africanism has spread and has touched more people than it ever has as far as the ideology. And there's a lot of people who even consider themselves Pan-Africanists, but really don't even know what Pan-Africanism is. But I think the seed has been planted. So right now, I think like we're in the position to deal with neo-colonialism. We just need to, like this conference that we're having, this collective that we're having. We need to have more of these collectives, and even begin to consolidate the collectives, the different collectives, and bring them together. Because we're going to need that type of unity to bring about the change. But I think we are in a position to deal with neo-colonialism. But once we address neo-colonialism on an ideological level, and then on a physical level, to bring about this change, this dismantling of colonialism. Now we know what we need to do to prevent any sort of undermining of the Pan-African government, state, or however you want to call it, after the revolution. So can we say revolution on here? But yeah,
they say revolution all day on this channel. You come back.
All right, but yeah, that's my take. And but just going back really quick too, briefly to the importance too of bringing up We Charge Genocide, this being the 70th anniversary, and us talking about We Charge Colonialism. I think that's like deepening our understanding of the problem, because genocide is the product of colonialism, institutional colonialism. They commit genocide so that they can, prop up the colonial state. And so in order for them to maintain it, they continue to commit genocidal acts. So colonialism is inherently parasitic and genocidal. And so we're deep in the struggle and addressing the true source of all of the problems that we're facing.
I'm glad you made that point, because as I say in the document, as we say in the document, colonialism is genocide. It is a crime against humanity, and it's a crime in itself. So that's another part of the document that you can expect whenever we release at the end of this program, is a legal breakdown of the crime of colonialism. So Comrade Toivo or Comrade Songo, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll just jump in real briefly here, and again to say that one of the things that I would argue, I think, so to the question directly, I think that we most definitely are ready. The African world is ready, most definitely. I think that we've been fighting colonialism, capitalism, neo-colonialism, white supremacist, heteropatriarchal capitalism. We've been fighting that from the moment slavery began to now, and every single minute in between, right? And I think that what people understand is that you actually cannot have a full society that lives under these institutions. You actually will always have inequality, and you always will have to create alternate forms of survival just in order to survive. On the plantations, right? People had to create and to draw upon their own histories and cultures to create alternate societies within the plantation to survive, as well as to overthrow the plantation, right? And for me, that's why I work on a university. At the university, we call it a plantation. New York City is a plantation. All of it the plantation. The idea is to say that, to use the concept of the plantation to understand the socioeconomic and political reality in which we are in. I think people understand that, and I think people, just in order to survive, you actually have to be anti-capitalist to survive, because you cannot, or else you'll just die, right? If you're homeless, if you are if you're working class, working poor, right, marginalized in all these different kinds of ways, you have to survive, right? And so because of that, the embryos, if you will, and the puzzle pieces are all there. The question now is that can we upscale what we are already doing, right? Because unfortunately, again, capitalism is a global system that has control over the nation states that now regulate, if you will, the world system as we know it. Can we upscale what we're doing on the local level, right? To try to expand this, number one. And part of the upscaling of this is also to create alternatives to capitalism, because one of capitalism's greatest strengths is to say that there's only capitalism. So you go left, it's capitalism. You go right, it's capitalism. You stay straight, it's capitalism. So it's part of it is to create that alternative. And I think people, and tied to that is capitalism trying to tell people that no, you cannot do anything else that makes any sense outside of us, or outside of this particular frame of reference or thinking of things, right? And that's part of the challenge, right? And even now, us saying this right now, some people will say, well, you guys are ideologues, you're dreamers, you don't actually know what reality is. But the reality is we would not have even survived if we had not been already doing this. Right. So, of course, maybe one of the first, maybe greatest examples that people will think about, of course, would be the Haitian Revolution. Right. It's to upscale those things on a larger level through revolution. Right. But also through transformation and change of the Haitian economy that was sabotaged by, of course, a Haitian elite that is aligned to the global imperialist system, but also by the global imperialist system itself. It's like, we can't actually have some black slaves out here, having freedom, and then actually threaten all this money we make in here off these black people. We can't have that. So they had to cordon it off, right? And that's why we say Haiti is still fighting to this day, right? And the idea is to upscale these things. Our idea is to upscale these things in order for us to transform the world. So I think that we are ready. I think a lot of what we have to challenge, what the challenge is part of what colonialism also does, right? Is colonialism tries to argue to us, tries to convince us that we are not enough. That you are not enough as you are, right? You need white supremacy in order to actually be something of value, right? And so part of what we have to do in the Pan-Africanist movement is to say, no, we are enough as we are, right? And as we are, we have the tools, right? We have, as Cabral would say, return to the source, right? We have the tools, right, to actually reorganize and to change things, right? Claudia Jones, Trinidadian Black Marxist in the U.S. and then later in the UK, she talks about, in one of her articles talking about, kind of a critique to the Communist Party in the United States, saying, listen, you guys actually are not organizing with Black women enough, because Black women have always been mobilized. You actually don't have to teach Black women how to run a meeting, how to door knock, how to pass out flyers, how to bring the community together, because people been doing that. They actually can teach you how to do that better, right? So the idea is to say that the embryos are there. So now are we harnessing, right, what we already have? right? Of course, not to say that in of itself you cannot learn from anybody else. Of course you learn, right? But the argument is you are learning as you are. You're not a blank slate, right? You aren't just something that's just there that anybody can just write on. No, there's already writing there. The book is already there. Now we are adding to the pages, right? We're adding to the chapters. And I believe that we have the tools to be able to, from that space, to be able to create something different. And that's why these conferences are very, very important, have always been very, very important, right? Since the first Pan-African conference, right, in 1899, 1900, right? Since the Haitian Revolution itself, right? Since a number of events happening across in the 19th century, 20th century, across the Pan-African world, right? These things are important for us to be able to begin to connect the dots, right? It's why whenever we say we have a Pan-African conference, we want to all meet together. The system, the white supremacist system freaks out, as they should, right? As they should, because it means we are now beginning to meet without them as the medium between, right? So again, I think that the idea, I think that the challenge for us is to convince ourselves in a material, spiritual fashion that we actually are enough. We have the tools to build something better because we already are building different kinds of things. If you are poor living in the hood, or if you're poor living in the village, right, you know that you have to cooperate to survive, or else you will just die. There's no way you could figure it out. You'll be able to live by yourself as an individual, as the capitalists will tell you, right? To pull yourself up by your bootstraps, even though you have no boots, right? You have to rely on everybody else, right? That in of itself is the socialist, if you will, to use a socialism or our black communalism or whatever terms you wish to use, right? We are enough as we are. And so I think that our people are ready for this. I just think now the challenge is to connect the dots and then to upscale some of these things, and then to also take a look at ourselves and to see where we have made some of the mistakes. So I would just close on just saying on this particular point by saying that part of also what we have to struggle with is that from, if you will, it's the Pan-African liberation movements, and by this I include, the Black Panther parties, if you know, the ANC, SWAPO, and all the larger, Frelimo, all these different large-scale party organizations. There was harm that was done, right, to our people. There was mistakes that were made, right, and that's part of, SNCC. We can talk about SNCC. We can keep on going down. In Jack in Trinidad, we can keep on going down the different groups across the Pan-African world, right. And so part of what we have to do in some ways is to A, rebuild trust, but then also B, to see what a newer generation is doing to build collective consciousness and community, right, in reaction to some of the mistakes, as well as into reaction to the system that's exploiting them, right. And then that also is kind of what we can maybe use to begin to push forward some of these things. And I do believe that globally, I think without question, the most radical and cutting edge and revolutionary thinking around this is coming from Black feminists and Black LGBTQ struggles across our space. But these are the groups that even within the radical Pan-African movements were marginalized. And so it's from them that we're beginning to think through, the Marsha P. Johnsons, the Sylvia Riveras, right? Recently we lost Bell Hooks, right? So it's this tradition actually that has been very, very essential to thinking of these things differently. So this is kind of how I imagine what our capability is. Sorry, that was a little long-winded, Elder Sango. Please, it would be great to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, and before you go, Comrade Sango, I do also want to point out a point that you made is that we are, open membership. So if you are African-led, that's a big thing. You're African-led, African-focused organization who agrees with the basic issue. The issue that we're facing right now is colonialism. This is open to you as well. So I posted our contact information. I'll post it again for anyone who wants to reach out. Comrade Sango, I know your screen is still frozen, but I don't know if you could still hear us. But if you can hear us, is Africa ready to address neo-colonialism?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think you can't see me, but I can hear you. So maybe it's a spiritual thing here. But anyway, aside that, that I don't actually have much to add, and I think both of the last submissions were quite good and covered it greatly. But what I would say though is that in a way I look at things being ready in kind of an objective sense and also in a subjective sense. And I think what I mean by that is that a lot of work has to be done, and which is why coming together, to do this it's to raise the consciousness of quite a lot of the masses. Like in Nigeria here, for example, it's a long struggle, and we will probably come to talking about that. The idea of whether people think colonialism is responsible for their issues. There's a lot of propaganda and counter, influences. And then you have a very powerful state machinery, which is quite tied to the neo-colonialists. And so, the question of raising people's consciousness, even to understand, we have quite a lot of people here in Nigeria, for example, who believe the United States is the paragon of it all, and they want to be like the United States. It's kind of like, these are kind of struggles we have to do. But yes, we are completely ready. But we understand that the point is to build the unit.
Can you hear us, comrade?
I'm sorry, I was just interrupted by a call, but I was just rounding up there anyway. So we have to take the steps we need to take, really. And that is very essential that we take actions that is going to raise the level of consciousness of the masses. That's it.
So I want to. Okay, are you still talking? Okay, I think he's finished. Stop me if I cut you off, comrade. But so this kind of turns to, I think, another issue that comes into play. I'm sure all of you have observed by now that Pan-Africanism has been something that is co-opted. Obviously, we know that Pan-Africanism is an objective. The objective is all African people. We are interlinked in this struggle. And we have to come together if we're going to adequately be able to decolonize. So I would ask you, especially whenever we think of the history of our colonial movements, where a lot of them have been more nationalized but have been thwarted by colonial powers, what role does Pan-Africanism play in the issue of decolonization? Anyone can jump in.
Maybe just to jump in real quick, Walter Rodney, the Guyanese, revolutionary, scholar activist, he wrote a really nice, actually a critique of people, someone who people really like, actually, Julius Nyerere, in Tanzania, writes a critique of them in 1974. He's actually critiquing what's called the Six Pack, right? The Sixth Pan-African Congress, all right? And what he was critiquing mostly was that he was like, listen, part of the issue that we're having is that we have accepted the colonial borders. And so you've talked about, again, in 1945, it was very clear in Manchester, right, that we are coming together. We cannot have these colonial borders, right? We must unify now, as Kwame Nkrumah would later say, right? We have to unify now, and not just here on the continent. The diaspora matters as well. Him even coming from Guyana, people like CLR James and others who also were central in that conference's creation, right, is to say that, listen, by accepting the colonial borders, you actually you begin to think of yourself as a Nigerian or as a Namibian or as a Tanzanian or as someone from, the United States or from, Brazil or Colombia, right? Or, Puerto Rico or wherever, right? You begin to think in colonial terms by how you define yourself in these ways, right? And so by accepting them, right, even when countries were winning independence, right, you've already capitulated in some way, and that limits what you are able to do. Even if you just from a level, our comrade talked about an objective sense, right? Even if you take from the perspective of, say, a common market, for example, right? Many of our countries were created to be colonies. They were not created to be self-sustaining. The idea isn't to run the deficit. It's supposed to be broke because it's actually being drained to feed the imperialist center. Right. So by accepting these borders, it has actually hindered the process of decolonization. Right. And Rodney got in trouble a lot in Tanzania, actually, because he was saying a lot of things about armed struggle and revolutionary struggle, etc. And again, we love Nyerere. He is our, he's the Malimu, he is our teacher. But just being Malimu doesn't mean you're always right. Right. And so we love him still. Right. He was important for us. But the critique was we have to take this very seriously. Right. We have to begin to seriously do the work, which is to dismantle this. Right. Because as we said before, with neo-colonialism, the way we can think about some of these institutions and structures is that these heads of state or government in the different countries, in my opinion, are basically middlemen, right? In like a company structure, you're the middleman, and then you actually, and then you're working for the global conglomerates, right? Who actually now are doing all these different things. In our document that again people have compiled and people have done a lot of labor on that, particularly Tyranny has done a lot of labor putting it together. We have a whole bunch of organizations at the back of the document that we're listing that have historically been exploiting the African continent and the African peoples, right? These actually are, if you will, the board members. These are actually the real CEOs, right? Who actually are running some of these things. Even I don't care what billionaire an African has. People are flying to space for like 5 minutes for $40 million. So I mean, please, if you have $1 billion, like that actually, if Elon Musk woke up with $1 billion, he would freak out. You know what I mean? So like oh my God, lost all my money. So it's like so this is about having $1 billion. I mean, Let's get serious. Now, of course, if you're poor, $1 billion is a lot, but the idea is that from a larger mass scale, right? So I think that really the unification of the African continent politically, economically, and socially is very, very important. And I think one of the problems is that, to your point, Pan-Africanism has been discredited because a number of leaders who we used to really care about, and I'll say, people like Museveni and others, et cetera, have used Pan-Africanism, and once they were champions of Pan-Africanism, but then as time has gone on, they fell into the logic of the nation state, and that has then delegitimized Pan-Africanism, right, in the masses in the countries. Right, even in Namibia, Namibia is a little different than a number of places, but even here, if you say Pan-Africanism, oh, you just sound like certain people in the ruling party who will say that, and then we see them stealing 50 million here, 100 million here, selling out our land here, agreeing to reparations with Germany for like a trip for a trifle, et cetera, right? It delegitimizes it, right? So that's why part of the building work again is that we have to be clear about where we stand to the left and where they stand. Right. And so Pan-Africanism is central to the decolonization project because it says we have to dismantle those borders. And dismantling the borders does not mean we're all the same and there's no differences. Shoot, even in my family, we have 3 siblings. We're all very, very different. That doesn't mean that we're not a family. Right. And then, of course, linguistically, we can keep on going down. Linguistically, certain things, we have a lot of similarities across the place. Right. So I think that's where Pan-Africanism is central. And to give people hope that, again, collectively, we can fight against this system. Right. You don't have to fight against the forces of Babylon, if you will, to use a Rastafari term, the forces of Babylon by yourself. You cannot. Right, in some ways, right? So Pan-Africanism says we have to come together, right? And then again, even to come at it from a level of an objective space, shoot, even the Europeans know they can't compete against China or the United States by themselves. What is Belgium compared to the US or to Russia or to China? It's nothing. Belgium or even France. France has been broke, but because they're exploiting Francophone West Africa, they have a level of credibility in Europe that they would never have. You see what I'm saying? It's why the right is so strong in France, and they're confused as a nation, right? So I think that even they realize you need EU. It's why the Brexit thing actually is hilarious. Personally, if you really understand the depths of it, it's actually hilarious because they actually are against themselves. It's hilarious. But even on that level, we have to begin to come together, and particularly for our comrades, our family in the diaspora, having a strong, unified continent is important to help protect them. To say, okay, if you keep on shooting our Black people in the United States, you keep on having them in poverty, we will cut all oil, all diamonds, all everything. We'll make gas in the US be $20 a barrel. How about that? $20 a gallon. How about that? You know what I mean? And then you'll see if it's $20 to go, for a liter, whatever it is, to go get your gas pump, you're gonna see it change real quick. You feel me? Even getting the renewable energy that they're talking about, these smart cars and the clean cars. Where are they getting the cobalt from? They're getting it from Congo. So if we cut that off in those kinds of things, you will treat them with respect. You will treat them and you will give them reparations, including also our Native American, our indigenous population comrades there in the US and in the Americas as well. You will see a shift. That's why Pan-Africanism is central. And that's why that the imperialists are fighting 24/7 to subjugate it, to marginalize it, and then, of course, in good capitalist fashion, to commodify it, right? In order to control it and to prevent the masses from seeing it as a route to liberation, right? So that's why. So in those levels on the continent,
No, I was gonna say, and you made a good point. I was thinking through it, like, wow, you never really do hear of the United States, even the biggest military power, really going at a war completely alone. Like, they'll even go and say, okay, like France or UK come in with us. You certainly don't hear the smaller European countries go at it alone. So what sense does it make whenever you have some people thinking that they can decolonize alone and without allying with their other brothers and sisters throughout the diaspora and throughout the continent? So, Brother Sango and Ikemba, what do you want to jump in? Comrade Sango, looks like you jumping in. You jumping in?
Happy for Comrade Ikemba to go first if he's ready, but I could just come in briefly. Okay. Yes.
Go ahead.
I'll add. Okay. Just to add on. Pan-Africanism. I think with Pan-Africanism. Well, building off of what Toivo was saying in regards to the borders, I think like with Pan-Africanism, which is the antithesis of colonialism and imperialism, right? It does get us to look beyond the borders and build a political an economic structure among ourselves, a superstructure that can really deal with the colonial institution, right? When I think about the borders, I'm thinking about this invention by the colonists that really like we're continuing. Toy was talking about like we have to get rid of these borders because it is imaginary. The colonialists, when we think about it, like they don't even recognize the borders. The borders were important for a time period when they were competing with each other, right? But today, like those borders is non-existent. They go wherever they're all going into the colonies and exploiting African people. So and that's why Pan-Africanism is important, because it does get us to look beyond that. It does it once again, like just to build on what was already said, like we can retain our ethnic identities, our culture, and our traditions. That's what we do within our community. But that has nothing to do with the superstructure, the political and economic structure that we build to protect and defend all African people, politically and economically. And we have been doing that for millennia. Like it's nothing new. We've built superstructures and still retained our ethnic identities. We learn not in European history classes, but we learn when we study African history about the empires of Mali, the empires of the Songhai Empire, the Ghana Empire, the Homi, the Masi states. We learn about all of the Benin, from those who study, African history. So we know that there were superstructures in place historically. And then when we go into that analysis, we understand that there was, some stratification within those systems. But, that's something that we have to overturn as we build this new system. But I think the point is, like, that's what, Pan-Africanism really does, and how come it's so important in this process of decolonization, because it does, going back to what we initially was talking about at the top of the hour in regards to the importance of unity and organization among African people, particularly the African working class, because they are the ones who are going to have to determine, what this new state is going to look like. They're going to have to determine the relationship that they have, with the land and the resources, because they are the ones who are producing all the wealth. It just reminds me, and I'm maybe digressing a little bit, but just a conversation when somebody was saying that the problem with Black people or African people, and generally speaking, is that we don't produce anything. And I'm like, what? We produce everything. Like, what are you talking about? So, and that's the idea that we are battling against, as if the capitalist is the one who's producing, everything. No, he might come up with a nice idea, but it's the people, the masses, who are producing. But yeah, but I think like that's why the idea of Pan-African unity is so important. This collective is so important, because it's seen beyond. We're people in Zimbabwe, Namibia, United States, Nigeria. So we're showing that it can be done. And yeah, but that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
And I think a correct thing that your friend could have said was, we don't control anything. We might not control our destinies at this point. Well, we control our destinies, but we not control our reality, but we do produce it. Look at everything that we have, everything that you see. Look at the labor that's stripped from many Africans throughout the continent and throughout the diaspora. Another point that we talk about in the declaration that we'll be releasing very soon at the end of the program is that think about all of the prison labor that goes into products that we don't even think about. I mean, just when we were doing research for this document, there's some companies that you just shop at and you don't realize those same companies are taking prison labor in order to basically get their product out as cheaply as possible. So yes, we're the ones building things, we're the ones producing things, but we're not the ones controlling things. And that's the reality of colonialism. And that's why we have to address it. So Comrade Sango, you want to come in?
Yeah. First of all, to the point Comrade Toivo was making, it's very important that we, Pan-Africanism for us is defined as revolutionary Pan-Africanism, for it to be useful in addressing neo-colonialism. And I don't see any other way around it. And the issue is, as Comrade Toivo, mentioned, is the fact that there are those who would use Pan-Africanism in a commodified way, and the issues about addressing things like culture and so on is quite important, but that having an essential understanding of the capitalist state that operates here, and that uses our own uses other Africans, a minority of Africans, to suppress the majority. That we have to have a revolutionary change, and the only way to do that, we cannot stand alone. As you said just now, we have a common history of oppression. It's very common. It's about taking our resources, our labor, our land, and if we are to become independent, we have to rely on each other, which is also an African idea anyway. Nobody stands alone. And But how we do that, it has to be, for me, really has to be within the revolutionary framework, because we can talk about organizations like the Organization of African Unity and things like that, who are actually, again, just using these things, as a cover to pretend to be united and made up of people who are actually serving the interests of the imperialists. And then lastly, I think it was quite important point made by Comrade Nkemba. Here, for example, in Nigeria, we have, because of the crisis point we have been brought into, we have a lot of ethnic divisions coming up, of course, which normally happens. It's not new. And I find that Pan-Africanism is an antidote. The ideology of Pan-Africanism is an antidote against these ethnic divisions. For people to think of themselves, of course, you think of yourselves as whatever nationality you are, but this wasn't the way it used to be, in the sense that people related to one another on an equal basis, and were quite open and traded and so on. And before the imperialists came and created borders and also utilized divisions in order to keep people divided. So, and we find that once people key into the Pan-Africanist ideology, they become less concerned about these ethnic struggles in the way they are being carried out, right now. So it's really, there's no other way around it. It's Pan-Africanism or perish, as we say in in the material you mentioned earlier. So yeah.
And you led me right into the next question, because the theme of the convention, everyone, that again we're hosting or the conference we're hosting in July, a virtual conference. I'll post the registration again in case there are any newcomers. But the theme is Pan-African Unity or Perish. And one thing I want to bring up is that there are differences among different Pan-Africanist organizations about what Pan-African unity means. So how do we deal with the fact that we have very much class conscious or class reality societies? We have the masses who are being oppressed by a small amount of people. And oftentimes the ones who are talking about let's come together are the ones who are in control. So what does Pan-African unity look like whenever you're talking about decolonization? Does it include the bourgeoisie Africans with the masses? And how do we work that out in a way that's going to be true to the purpose of decolonization? You like you want to take that.
Nah, I'm just, I'm just thinking, but what does it look like? Does it include all levels? Like the bourgeoisie, they're going to have, first of all, there's can't be any bourgeoisie, in the revolution. There, in the new society, I should say, the bourgeoisie of this society is going to have to make a decision. I believe, and this is my position, the stance. I feel like they're going to have to make a decision. They're going to have to commit class suicide. Che Guevara did, right? And so, if they're willing to do that, we can reconcile the differences that we have now to bring forth a revolution. Because especially like first we have to deal with the black bourgeoisie, which is in our community, Sango mentioned, I think he mentioned like the neo-colonialism or neo-colonists. Like this is something that we are dealing with. There was even a question earlier dealing with neo-colonialism. And so the Black bourgeoisie, they are the ones who are helping to legitimize European or foreign domination of Africa, the continent, and African people everywhere. In our communities here in the United States, our communities are being controlled by outside forces because the Black bourgeoisie is working with the ruling class to allow it to happen because they're able to benefit from the system. So I don't see, the bringing forth of this new society. I don't see the Black bourgeoisie having a role in that society, but they can have a role in the revolution if they commit, class suicide. I hope that answers your question. Like, I feel like
no, it does. I love it. You need to commit class suicide. It's true. So, anyone else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I think essentially just to maybe a little bit expand on that in terms of the kind of society we want, is that, and what quite a few people might not realize is that part of not having independence is that we have been forced to adopt something foreign to us, and we have been forced to adopt this proto-capitalist system, which isn't, is a specific kind of capitalism that insists that you must have people who you must give over your resources, and there's a few people as middlemen who were mentioned earlier who come in and they take a cut, and they use the state machinery to repress people. And if we really want independence, then we have to address the structure of the society and go back to certain positive African values that, in terms of cooperation between people and the community being supreme. So, I wouldn't say in advance whether or not there will be, whether the bourgeoisie, aspects of the people who are capitalists, just like in the United States, when you or maybe let's talk about the colonies in the metropole. Essentially, if you are Black, you might be a member of the bourgeoisie or whatnot, but that's not going to stop a policeman often from doing what they're going to do to you because they can't read your read your class. And in the same way, there are those of us who have who can realize if you are nationalist. This is the point I'm trying to come to. You want to fight for your nation, then you have to do what is necessary, because we are going to suffer in one way or another from the racist imperialism, of course. But many of these don't think their own interests rather than the community interest. They think only of their own interest, and they want to do whatever it is, sell out their brothers. So this has to be addressed. This is going to be a class-based struggle. This is a struggle to reform the nature of the society, to fight for independence. And so we don't see any other way around it, in a sense. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Toivo, you want to come in with this one?
Yeah. Okay. So one thing I think that, again, I want to second a lot of what people are saying, but, where my mind has been going lately, just on the streets, in the struggle as many of us are, is the building itself. Right. And so part of it also is that what we need to begin to imagine is to reorganize society from those marginalized spaces. Right. And those marginalized spaces actually being the bedrock of actually what keeps up the system as it is, right? How do we reorganize it from that perspective, right? You talk about, this semester, for example, one of my classes, we were doing a lot of work around reproductive justice, right? And the reproductive justice movement, when you go deeper into that, you look at Black midwives, right? You look at, birthing justice workers, right? You look at just the working people such as this, right? Who were using African traditions, Black cultures and practices, right? To begin to say, we have to now create the society within which, right? Bodies that are giving birth can actually have and flourish, right? So, for example, the article, really great writing by a comrade of mine called Crystal Eddings, right? She's written some great work on maroonage and reproductive justice, right? And in the sense to say that maroonage was an act of reproductive justice, because on the plantation, right? Any child you're giving birth to is not yours; it is it's master's child, right? And that child is now going to be sent to a life of backbreaking labor, if not death on the plantation, right? So on the one hand, to burn down the plantation or to run from the plantation is an act of reproductive justice, right? We even look, as we know, right, there are many African women in particular who did have abortions on plantations to prevent master from enhancing his wealth and from subjecting them to a life of slavery and enslavement, right? Slavery and enslavement, right? So when they created their maroon communities, part of what was central to those who are running away is this community must create the conditions, right, where we're now able to eat healthy, right, where we can have safe places to give birth, right, where we're in as much as possible within the plantation economy where you're on the margins, a loving community, right, where you're able to have the food nourishment that you need. We're not being whipped every goddamn day because you're not working hard enough for master, right? This part of the work, for example, that the birthing justice movement has always been doing since the plantation to now, right, is to begin to now center ourselves from those visions of struggles back to saying, as we said in the beginning, we are already enough. Right, we have the skills there and the tools to begin to do this. Right, black midwives in the South and in the in black communities in the United States, for example, they were always about saying yes, it's about birth, but it's also just about creating the conditions around birth. Right, making sure you ain't working 18 hours a day. Right, making sure you actually have the nourishment that you need. Right, and of course on the sugar plantations themselves are designed to drain nourishment from the ground, right? They actually are not good for the soil over and over, right? Which means you cannot grow crops on that soil to actually feed your community the healthy food that it needs, right? Part of the issue with Zimbabwe, for example, in its land reform was that, yes, your cash crop industry was indeed destroyed in some of the land repossession movements. But what it began to happen was many people were able to grow their cassava, their yams, right? They're able to grow their food to sustain themselves. So yes, you're not making money on the international market, but you are feeding your people, right? That should also be seen as part of reproductive justice, right? Part of the LGBTQ movement talking about we have to create spaces where we can be feeling safe as we move across, right? Because sometimes we can be very macro sometimes in how we understand these things, but some of the day-to-day things are essential for the macro changes to even be thought about, right? So for example, we want a society where my sister can walk down the street wearing whatever she wears and she's gonna be left alone. You feel me? Right? And how even ourselves as men are trapped in these models of patriarchy and heteropatriarchy, right? We need to be able to liberate ourselves from these systems of oppression that even contain and constrain our own thoughts on what liberation, transformation, and change are, right? So I think it's also about us really having the humility, right? Maya Angelou, I was at a talk of hers years and years ago, and she said, I don't ever want to be humbled, right? Because humbled is like, you are here and to go down. No one's going to take me down nowhere, right? But to be filled with humility is to understand who I am, where I am, right? And to be open to a new way of understanding how the world needs to work, right? And so I think that's also what's very much needed in any kind of revolutionary Pan-African consciousness, right? Is a revolutionary humility, right? It's say, hey, we are open to different kinds of ways of thinking. Yes, in Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Walter Rani, they did not have all the answers, right? They actually, in many ways, reproducing a lot of the problems that we're dealing with, right? So how can we begin to look at different models within a rich, beautiful Pan-African tradition to begin to say from these margins, we are now going to reorganize society? I say most of that because in Namibia right now, the leading movement, I think right now is the Black feminist struggle here. And a lot of it came around the abortion laws, right? And why we can think of even an issue as abortion laws, right? Being revolutionary Pan-African is because the laws that are about abortion come from the apartheid regime. We just kept the same laws from the apartheid regime, but yet apparently we're decolonized. And then when they begin to critique the abortion law, people say, no, it's against God. The God of the Dutch Reformed Church or the God of the African peoples. Right. And that is essentially what the critique is now being, and saying, no, we have to reorganize this thing. And so even many of us are trapped within the logics of, again, heteropatriarchal white supremacist capitalism, right? We are trapped in those things and we have to break free of those things, which is an internal struggle as well as it is a collective struggle as well as a macro struggle. So I think it's to recenter ourselves in some of these things as the vision of how the building works. I think a lot of us will know that capitalism is a problem, but the problem is it's hard for us to imagine and to then think of building that alternative, because sometimes it's like you rather deal with the devil that you know versus the devil that you don't know. Jumping into the unknown sometimes is scarier than just we know what to deal with this. You know what I mean? And so I think part of it also is to say, no, you actually already building the alternative, right? And it's right in front of you. But a lot of what inhibits our blinders from seeing this are these various forces that the system is trying to push on us.
Yeah, and you hit a very important part when we're readapting old things and trying to pretend as though the history of apartheid, the history of colonialism, the history of enslavement, that these things aren't attached to a lot of the things that we try to repackage and use for our own liberation. And so that's a part of, I think, decolonization is we have to do an in-depth study of what colonialism did to us in the first place. What types of things did we adopt without necessarily thinking, is this even good for us? You know, we've been talking a lot about capitalism. Some people, you tell them capitalism is not good, they have a freak out. Like, what do you mean? That's all there is. So yes, we have to have an in-depth dissecting of the colonial system, of the things that we've adopted as being true, and are they really true? And is this really good? Is good what they have packaged to us as far as development? Is that really development whenever you have masses of poor people who are out on the streets all while this beautiful building is standing? So these are the things that we want to bring up in the convention, inside of the document we'll be releasing. All of these things are important for us to dissect. What is it that is actually true to us as a people, and what are things that were imposed on us? So going to the last question before we release our declaration against colonialism, it is we are in a modern time. Obviously, I personally adapt I guess a Maoist view of revolution, that we're in a protracted war and things aren't necessarily going to happen all at once. What does decolonization look to you? What would decolonization be if we were starting now and saying, like, let's say we go forward to the next 10 years, what does the colonization, what could happen substantially for us as a people to focus on and continue to build a foundation from? What would the colonization look like in the immediate sense? So again, the floor is open, whoever wants to jump in.
I'll jump in. Like for me, I feel like well, one of the things what we're doing is part of that process of decolonization. So it does look like various organizations, Pan-African organizations, coming together, having these conferences, having these talks about how we want to move together as a group. You know, how can we do a better job working together politically as well as economically? I think the other part too is what decolonization looks like is us redirecting our resources and beginning to build an alternative economy among ourselves. So, you know, no more finding a way. It's not, you know, boycotting, you know, like as a means to get some sort of concession. No, we're not spending money with you. We're redirecting our money among ourselves. So this doesn't have anything to do with you. It has something to do, I guess it does in a sense, but you know, this has something to do with us building a economic infrastructure among ourselves. So I think like that's part of this process. So as we're meeting, we're having discussions about that, because we you know have to understand, like, you know, it's the economics is the foundation of all of the institutions and everything that we build, whether it's the schools and everything that we build. So I think like that's very important. It has to be a part of these discussions that we are having. And so I mentioned education. I think like that's the other part too. You know, so I'm gonna just say those three things because I think a lot of the things can happen simultaneously. But you know, just the meetings of our organizations, continuing to consolidate these organizations, building with Africans, the Africans, the diaspora, building with the Africans on the continent. So when I do talk about this alternative economy, it's us, you know, building and doing import export with Africans as if we're operating as a nation. You know, we have to have that mindset. So that's where that redirection is going. And the last thing is in regards to the education piece, which is very important because the colonizer is controlling the minds of the people through the media, through the schools. And so we do have our media. We, you know, it's us doing, you know, stepping up our game as far as getting our media out there to the mind, you know, to the people, African people, and also just building more liberation schools and supporting those schools wherever they are. So we don't necessarily we can support a school in our community, but we can also seek out liberation schools. You know, maybe we don't have one in our community, but find somebody to support so we can make sure that we are educating our children for revolution. But yeah, that's all.
Yeah, that definitely align with the issue of ideology. That's probably the biggest foundation that has to be made, is that we have to understand constantly we're being showed messages of what we should aspire to, and these things are not, again, decolonization. Literally, we're told to aspire to consolidation of colonialism inside of Africa, instead of told to imagine outside of a world where our finances and our resources are controlled by a few people, and instead reimagine something where we are all collectively in control of our lands, of our communities. And so, yes, the ideological war has to be waged for many of our people. It has to be waged in Pan-Africanism. I say that because a lot of my YouTube brothers and sisters who are so happy that people are interested in Africa and so happy that Africa is marketed, some of us get carried away with just trying to make Africa look like this is the West. And we should understand that anytime that we see these reproductions of Western capitalism inside of Africa, it comes at the detriment of the masses. And so absolutely, the ideological war is probably step one. So I could definitely align with that. Comrade Sango and Comrade Toivo, what does Pan-Africanism look like within, or not Pan-Africanism, decolonization look like if, let's say, a 10-year time span? What needs to happen in the immediate?
Yeah, if I comment, I think the points made by Kemba and yourself just now, excellent. And I think when you were speaking just recently, Tierney, you talked about not realizing that some of the way we do things were forced on us, and I think if you look at the question of education, and if people read our declaration about Nigeria, there's a small part. We didn't have much space because I would have really liked to address that much more in the declaration. But let's look at education. During colonialism, we were forced to do education in a particular way because we were not expected to be scientists or to be industrialists. We were expected to be clerks and messengers and, farmers and diggers of the ground and things like that. So, we were forced to do certain types of education, not technical education. And funny enough, the imperialists introduced here in Nigeria, what do they call it? Home education. Is it? I forget what they call it now. Home, where you teach girls to cook and do homework, home things, which was not something we used to do. So you started to bring in this idea that girls were inferior and girls should do other things. And some people now believe that was the African way, which was completely false. It was not the African way at all. It's forced on us, but somehow it gets integrated with what we believe is our culture now. So that's also part of the aspect of education. So education has to be the thing that has to change, immediately, in the sense of how up till now, because I was talking about colonialism, what colonialism did to education, is that till now we have continued down that path. So our educational system, our leaders actually consider it completely irrelevant and unimportant. They have completely defunded it. And there's no interest in whether people are getting educated in the right ways. So people essentially just educate in order to find some niche jobs where they're in the service economy, So again, we are not able to be self-reliant, and it goes to self-reliance. We have to begin again to show the technical ingenuity that Africans were capable of. That when we can invent and innovate that fits the context of our environment, we don't have to rely on important things that are actually suited to other environments. We can actually see an immediate dramatic change by doing that. We can develop the quality of our life quite fast. It will actually amaze people, but it's just that simple change in education, in our line, the people to begin to develop, invent things that are suited to the environment in which they work, and which is also where African unity comes in. Because if we are able to do this across Africa, we can relate with ourselves and share, ideas, share technologies and things like that. So, in the immediate instance, if across Africa, we are having to do this, and we are, cooperating with each other. We'll see a difference, and the issue of the culture as well, has to be addressed. Chinua Achebe, talked about the trouble in a book called The Trouble in Nigeria, how colonialism, again, another import of colonialism, because a lot of people here see the problem in Nigeria or generally in Africa as just a problem of bad leaders and corruption, cannot see the tie to neo-colonialism. And Chinua Achebe talked about the problem of Nigeria being a problem of leadership, which people actually tend to not understand him, that he was talking more deeply than just the simple problem of leadership. He talked about how the Europeans actually destroyed, what was the good leadership available in Igbo land, replaced them with, what we will now see as puppets, criminally minded people. And those are the people that are still ruling us today. So in decolonizing, we remove these people, but the culture that has been passed down through the ages of the way politics is supposed to be done, the culture of greed is good, has to be immediately, addressed, and back to the communalist culture that Africans have developed over time and have lived under. So all of that, there's so much that can be done that can show the positive impact of Pan-Africanism, if we can achieve decolonization.
Yes, absolutely. And that communalist culture that we should go back to and study and understand that we do have a legacy as far as how we relate to each other economically. And it's not capitalism, African communalism. Search it, learn it, and understand that this is what we adapt to today. And what essentially, in my opinion, is the exact same thing as socialism. So as Toivo said at one point, which one you want to call it, I don't really care, as long as you are understanding that we have to redirect the resources to the masses and have cooperation and communal understandings of what is going to be done. Not I as an individual, but my community first. I as an individual comes after my community. That's a very different shift than what we have been ingrained with, but it's as necessary if we're talking about decolonization. So Toivo, you want to take us home on this question?
Yeah, and I actually want to start off. I want to just start where people just ended right now on that community thing, right? So for me, where my mind goes to is just, I'm going to go micro now, right? Is just, are we able to build healthy, sustainable organizations, political organizations, right? And then from that, even on the more micro level, as healthy, again, as healthy as you can be within an oppressive structure, right? But like, how do we deal, for example, with conflict amongst ourselves, right? How do we deal, for example, we talk about gender-based violence, right? Like, I live in a building with a Bronx where we know there's domestic abuse happening. How do we deal with that? We talk about defunding the police, right? Abolishing the police, right? All right, then we're gonna have to find a way to deal with some of these things in our community. What does that mean we have to do? How do we have to reorganize ourselves on that micro level to be able to deal with that, right? People are, you have comrades in our group that they're having children, right? How does the organization in the community now mobilize around that to help protect and to create an environment back to reproductive justice, right? How can we mobilize around that in certain ways, right? As you guys know, as many of you will know, in our political organizations, we're burnt out, we're tired, we're fighting every day. We got to survive the capitalists, we need the police, all this stuff. That we bring that anger, tension, fear, trauma into some of our spaces, many of our spaces, right? And that causes a lot of us to clash, as we know in the history of our organizations, right? How do we understand that? And in those places, I do not believe their answers, particularly say in Mao, Cabral, or Rodney, or others. I don't think their answers particularly necessarily overtly in those spaces. We have to create new answers and look new into new places, right? I keep on thinking of Toni Morrison and Alice Walker. One of the things I loved about their books was that they really took African Black community seriously, even under traumatic situations, right? They took community very seriously, right? We talk about Chinua Achebe, right? We talk about many of our novelists, right, have taken that very, very seriously. How do we create healthy, sustainable communities? How do we uninvisibilize? It's not a word, right? But uninvisibilize, the invisibilized labor in our communities, right? What does it mean to cook for each other? What does it mean to live together, right? Not saying you will not have conflict and disagreement, right? Not saying that you won't have these things, right? But the idea is to say, okay, how do we manage this, right? Because capitalism has told us how to manage these things. It's either call the police or go fight each other in certain ways. And I'm not saying fighting in of itself is a problem, but the idea is, how do we fight? Are we fighting in order to build something different? right? And I think that, so what I would like to see in the next 10 years or so is us to take some of these conversations seriously, right? Like, again, just, we've talked about this, you and me, Tyranny, but like the last, I think, say 6 years, I've lost probably 4 comrades to suicide, good comrades to suicide. That leaves scars on the community politically. How do we understand? How do we deal with that, right? What does that look like on the day-to-day, the minute-by-minute level? Right. And sometimes it means we may have to go look other places for knowledge that we're not used to going to look. Right. We have to begin, people, I think, and maybe to look at Fanon for a little bit. People in Wretched of the Earth really like reading the stuff on, on colonialism, on violence, etc. Right. But people generally ignore his stuff on the mental health issues. Right. He's a psychologist. Right. And when he's looking at those chapters on what colonialism does to the colonized and to the colonizer is actually very, very important. And people don't look at that stuff enough, right? Because what he's talking about is we're going to have to actually deal. I think people have somebody's misunderstood some of the violent stuff, right? So understand that violence is a sense of creation, not just destruction. It's actually said we have to remove that which is causing us certain harm, but we also need to be able to reorganize our societies in a particular kind of a way. It's why I like his piece on a dying colonialism a lot more, because a dying colonialism, he's actually talking about how, for example, during the revolution in Algeria, relationships say between father and daughter change, daughter and sister and brother change, right? Father and son, mother and son and mother, right? It's like these are the micro community transformations that now happen, right? In some of our patriarchal societies, right? Yo, pops can't be telling his daughter what to do all the time. Why? Because she's smuggling guns and bombs under her hijab or her dress, and you ain't gonna tell her what she's gonna go do in her free time. So I'm actually bringing these bombs across, right? Which means you actually have to reorganize it, because even how you are relating to her is how colonialism has told you to relate to them. It's been happening so long, you forgot. Right. And so I think that's what I would like to see in our micro levels of the next 10 years is, can we start taking these things seriously? How do we collectively heal? And to also value the healing work as revolutionary work. Right. For me, protests, is maybe 2, 3, 4% of what the actual revolution is. Right. The actual deeper work is that community building, which gives you the material, the spiritual material base in order to sustain the protest, in order to create something new. How can we talk about a Pan-Africanist world if we can't run a Pan-Africanist park together? How do we deal with disagreement with each other, right? And that's what I'd like to see. I do think personally that is tearing us apart. And in some ways, the capitalists don't even have to infiltrate us with agents. We do it ourselves, right? You don't need agents if we're actually going to fight each other ourselves, right? So part of it is on that micro level. How do we deal with that? Which is not to silence critique or dissent or disagreement. It's to take it seriously in a certain way, and to really go back to like Ubuntu, that love, revolutionary agape love, right? And the love to figure out how we can actually fight for something else, because capitalism is just harming us so badly. Right? We do not see those alternatives. So I'd like to see the next 10 years, more conversations around that, and to see more organizations take those things seriously, and create new structures so we can make new mistakes and not repeat the old ones of the past in our day-to-day lives.
Listen, I love y'all's answers, because I didn't think this was going to be the answers, but I think these are the true answers, because usually when we say what needs to happen in the first 10 years, someone says we need to take the land and seize the land, and we need to take the resources. But
that's true.
For real, those things have to happen. But I love the emphasis that before we can even do that, to do those things correctly, we do have to lay an ideological foundation. We have to lay a foundation as far as educating our youth and re-educating us, decolonizing our minds, and also healing ourselves as far as the traumatic things we've seen. I think, for example, inside of previous movements, how people who were not healed from the trauma of being inside of racialized societies trying to organize together, many times you would see unnecessary spats, you would see unnecessary division and unnecessary self-hatred being projected through to the revolution. So that's a very real, I think, analysis. And that's the part that I think we have to get as excited about as we want to be excited about taking back the land and taking back the resources. We also have to be excited about taking back our minds and taking back our conscious, So I appreciate everyone's responses on that. So everyone, now that we've basically wrapped up our discussion, I'm going to once again remind you all, this whole purpose of this whole gathering is we are having a convention where conversations like this you can expect to happen, where we're going to focus on the issue of colonialism. It's again, Pan-African Unity or Perish, a call for the abolition of neocolonialism. It will be a virtual conference, hybrid though, it will be in person in Zimbabwe, but also virtual for all of us who cannot go to Zimbabwe. The link is in the description of this video, and I'm actually right now going to release and post this in the comments. And also for people who watch later, it will be in the description of this video. I will release the declaration that we wrote. It's a long document, again, everyone, so take your time. No need to read it all at once. But the whole purpose of this is we want to see all of us adopt the fact that before anything else, our issue has to be colonialism. Before anything else, we have to have that as the focus. And all the other symptoms of colonialism, and that's what I think most of us focus on, we hyper-focus on the symptoms instead of the source. We have to allow those to fall to the side for a moment while we deal with the source. And the source is this globalist system, and we try our best to break it down inside of this document. We hope that you all read it and study it. We hope that you share it. It's for the public. It's not, for any one person. So it's inside of the comment section. It will be in the description of this video. And that's really all I have. Do we have any other thoughts from our comrades? You want to wrap up and tell us, what is it that we need to be focused on as far as moving forward?
Maybe one thing I would just say again is a little bit based on what we were saying earlier is that again in the context again of some of the feminist struggles here in Namibia, but also in terms of some of the like the reparations conversation. We had a conversation, me and Tierney, earlier in the year on the Hetero-Nama genocide by the Germans and what reparations actually looks like, right? And we talked about land, is to understand all these concepts as interrelated, right? Land question is an environmental question as well as a feminist question, right? Particularly in the African context, women have always been working the land. So if we don't have land, it disempowers women. So what is your to understand the interconnections between all these things on the micro level, I think is so important, because a lot of what these NGOs or the larger capitalist structures will do is to take some of our brilliantly radical things and then chop it up and then you're disinvested of the revolutionary fervor, and that is actually not what we need to be doing. So I think that just again is to understand the interconnections of all of these struggles. The land issue isn't just like a black nationalism, like an abstract, right? It's a tangible thing, right? Because we don't have land, we are now impoverished. Because we're impoverished, it creates a whole bunch of institutions and problems that's harming our people, right? And so that one of our colleagues in the BLF, she talks about, she's a poem saying we're coming for everything, and that's exactly what we need to be doing, is coming for everything, right? Everything. Right. And so I think that's really what we are doing. And again, we're building, we're going to learn, and I believe we are going to win. So I think there's a lot of pessimism in the world right now, and I do not share that. We are going to win, right? Because we've been winning. Even though it's been tough, there's a lot of victories that we have. Capitalists ain't going to tell you that you've been winning. But they're going to tell you that you've been doing a good job? No, we have got to do that for ourselves, right? Understand what we are doing. And I think that positive, that optimism is very, very needed so we can fight some of this pessimism running around the place.
And I do, on behalf of Black Power Media, who was so gracious to allow us to use their platform today, I want to thank Shiki Baby for the $10 donation to this grassroots platform. Thank you very much. Comrade Toivo and Comrade Ikemba, either of you want to give your final thoughts for the people?
You meant Sango. But yeah, I would just say, recognize that today is the 70th anniversary, as you will, of the We Charge Genocide petition. That's a part of our history. That's a part of our struggle to address colonialism, to address oppression and exploitation. And it wasn't just a moment in time. Like, we're a part of that history, and we're continuing to fight to be to get the international community to recognize what's happening to not just African people in the United States, even though this is what the petition was addressing, but we charge colonialism and we charge genocide around the world, against African people. So, we're just picking up the Black radical tradition. And the other part too, in regards to the petition, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, but definitely, I just want to leave everybody and just say, if you're not part of an organization, join an organization. If you're not part of this collective, join the collective. We will win, as Toivo said. I know it's going to happen, but we can expedite the process. If everybody get on the same page today. So, let's be a part of this struggle and this fight until victory is won.
And that is one requirement to join the coalition that we have with African-led organizations, that you have to be an organization. We don't want individuals necessarily just trying to move alone. We want us to move together. So I co-sign that completely. Comrade Sango, you want to take us home?
Yeah, just to pick on what Comrade Toivo said earlier, we are talking about Pan-Africanism, which is unity among African peoples. But to get there, we have to have unity among African organizations, despite our differences. And I think this is a great start, that other organizations, I will call on other Pan-Africanist organizations to join in with this initiative. I call on people to join in with the convention, to register to the convention, and yes, very key in your local areas, be part of organizations fighting, the neo-colonialist leaders on the ground, getting people to understand the roots of the crisis, doing educational work. I think we all know there's a lot of strength in unity. There's a lot of strength in organization, and it really is time to tap into that and move forward. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And again, you reminded me, Comrade Songo, to post the registration link again. So yes, again, the pre-registration, $10 off if you register before January 17th. So we hope everyone will join this conversation. We will have speakers. We will have, again, the president of Zimbabwe who will be opening up the convention. So we know Zimbabwe has been under sanctions just because they dared to take their land back from the colonizers. So perfect way to basically introduce this whole conversation of what we need to do as far as Pan-African unity. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you again to Black Power Media. Thank you to my comrades over here who have joined me. I know that this is during Fridays, Who Wants to Be, on the live, but you all showed up and I appreciate you all. So I hope everyone has a blessed day, and please do again follow us. The links to the social media, links to the decoration, links to the registration. I threw a bunch of links at you all, but hopefully you all will follow through and actually follow up with what we're going to be doing. So with that, I hope you all have a blessed Friday.